Everybody, welcome to Cloud and Clear. I'm really excited to have one of our great clients and someone that's near and dear to my heart for many, many reasons. We'll get into that later, but please welcome to Cloud and Clear, the CTO and founder of Reltio, Manish Sood.
Hi, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming along on this journey with us. We love telling these stories. And I think we have a very unique platform with which to do it through Cloud and Clear. And these are, the types of conversations that I think the market wants to hear the most, which is actual stories of organizations doing amazing things, especially in this very challenging time, really powered by cloud and cloud-related technologies. But before we get into that, we've known each other for a few years now. I feel like we're getting to know each other even better more recently. But tell us about your career journey and how you came about the idea behind Reltio and launching the company. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give you a little bit of a background, we started Reltio in 2011. And prior to starting Reltio, I was a product manager at Informatica, came to Informatica through the acquisition of another small startup called Safoian, which was in the master data management space, later became the main product line for Informatica. But most of my background has been in roles that are customer facing or in product management, working on creating data products that we can bring to customers. And a lot of what we are doing at Reltio was informed by the benefit of hindsight of having created the previous generation capabilities, working with customers, seeing where they were running into friction with the previous generation technologies, or even the previous generation models of buying software. Because as you know, you and I both have been living through this journey on the cloud. And the whole concept of subscription type of business models versus the on-premise, you throw the software over the fence and then expect for customers to deliver magic with it.
Yeah.
And having lived through that entire process and cycle, it was very clear in 2011 that the direction that the industry was going in was going to be primarily oriented towards the cloud, was going to be about bringing data into the cloud and doing it at scale. So, that set of experiences really informed our ability to start Reltio in 2011.
So you've been in the data business for a long time. It seems more recent, maybe in the last 5-6 years, that this sort of mantra that, data is the new currency, data is the new oil, data is very, very important. But you've known that far beyond the last 5 years, right?
Yeah, I like to call it data is the new sunshine.
I like that. But you were wise to it for a long time.
Well, most of my career has been working on data-related technologies and capabilities, and going back as early as the late '90s and early 2000s, part of my experience was working with very large customers where they were trying to integrate their front office and back office type of systems, and in all of those things, it wasn't that the technologies were not available to connect the dots across these different systems, because you had lots of plumbing available. You had EAI tools, ETL type of capabilities, the service bus type of capabilities. All of those things were there, but it was all about the point-to-point connections that you would have to stitch together. Mm-hmm. But none of these really solved the problem of, do you understand what's inside these systems? Because,
Right.
Today, I'm sure in your business, you have multiple applications that you use to interact and engage with the customers. You have your sales set of systems, and I say a set of systems because it's not just one single application that you use in your sales process. Right. Tell me if you do, because in that case, you figured out the magic for doing that. But today, wherever you look, it's multiple applications being used in sales, multiple applications being used in marketing, multiple applications being used in support, multiple applications being used in customer success. And across all of those, you have to figure out who the customer is, what are we doing with the customer, how do we engage better with the customer. And this problem has been around for a while. Just that, what used to happen before 15 or 20 years ago was the number of systems that you had to look across was very small and narrow.
And the amount of data,
amount of data was less, right? But and there was also a time when people would think that if I had wall to wall one provider, my problems would go away magically. Mm-hmm. Not the case anymore. That vision has come and gone. And most of the customers are now looking at what we call this application sprawl. There are multiple applications. Even a small business like ours, relatively small, I should say, because everything is relative when you're comparing size. We have at least 50 to 60 different applications that we use across our business.
Yeah.
For larger organizations, it's worse, right? It's a bigger number of applications. Yeah. Then you have data that comes from outside your organization, either through partners that you work with or third-party sets of information that you buy. Typical scenario for marketing or for sales to do that, buy lists and then try and combine that with the existing CRM data. It's common across every industry, although there may be data providers who are different in those industries. And over my career, I've seen this problem go from a handful of systems to companies at scale using thousands of systems. And then trying to understand, do we have the right customer information? Do we have the right supplier information? So, going back to your question about, we sort of knew that this challenge was going to arrive and the magnitude of the problem was only going to grow in size was very clear and evident. And now with the capabilities that are available in the market today in order to execute on your business process, you are going to leverage the best possible, best of breed type of combination of applications and business processes in order to get the job done. But do you have the right information? And that is where it is converting it into the concept of that data is the new currency. Data is the new gold or the new oil or the sunshine, right? That has to be available, accessible, usable everywhere. And you have to have new ways and new methods of tapping into that best source of energy that you're going to have access to. And almost every business is now sitting on lots of information that they have curated over a long period of time. But how do you get better value out of it is the big question that is staring everybody in the face.
So this moniker, this name of master data management, when was that born?
Master data management has been around for a long time, and it has gone through its own various cycles of reinvention. So it was around back in the 90s. As soon as multiple systems started cropping up, this need for, do I have a single source of truth for a certain piece of information was the type of question that started to get asked. Back then, it wasn't called out as master data management. The term master data management came about in the mid 2000s. Gartner proposed it as a combination of that you will need this for customer information, you will need this concept for supplier information, you will need this for employee information, you will need this for product information, and almost every other type of entity that matters most from a data perspective for your business to run on. And that got us to the concept of master data management. And since then, it has been an evolution where even now, this concept of what has to fit into the definition of master data management is leading to the expansion of the concept itself. Because a decade ago, it was just about matching name, address type of information, saying, here's my master record that you should use in data warehousing. But now customers are moving towards this concept of a 360-degree view that will fuel the engagement and the experience that you're trying to deliver. And doesn't matter if it is digital experience or if it is your customer experience that you're trying to improve in an omni-channel type of a manner.
Mm-hmm.
But the personalization that you can bring to the table, or the way in which you can engage with your audience, that has to be driven by how much do you know about them, how much do you understand in depth and detail, and understand it from the perspective of what's going on across your business. Because if something's not going well in support, your salesperson needs to know, right? Connecting the dots across these different engagement paths and channels that you have is becoming the key need. And that's leading to the expansion of the definition of the concept of MDM, where it's no longer just about the name and address information, it's about additional attribution, about the relationships between different types of entities, such as people to people, people to organizations, organizations to organizations, organizations to products, and then any kind of interaction that is taking place with those entities at the center of this kind of a universe.
This seems, it's more relevant than now, not only because of the amount of information, the number of systems, but I think also in terms of customer experience expectations have changed. It used to be okay to get, your data, your master data updated once a month or something like this, probably at some point in the 90s or 2000s. But now it's like real-time, comprehensive, accurate, and so much of business sort of process strategy, sales strategy, marketing strategy, support strategy has to be driven around all those attributes in real time. And I think it's just a lot of, I think consumer tech has changed enterprise expectations, so
big time
expectations.
Yeah.
And so that's super interesting that you're so ahead of this trend, putting you in the position to formulate this concept around Reltio. But look, Reltio is not only special because it's cloud. What I really like you to articulate is you have some amazing public customer references and wins, and the logos on your website are just, they keep going and going and going. So there must be something really special in the way that Reltio handles MDM. It's not just because it's cloud. And how do you articulate that value proposition of what differentiates Reltio from others?
So Tony, that's a really interesting question, because the challenge with MDM has been that it has always had a huge promise of the value that it can deliver. But most of the friction has been in how do you get to that answer, or to the promised land, or to the holy grail that is defined by the concept of MDM. Mm-hmm. And in most of the cases, if we look at the legacy technologies and the capabilities that were in the market before, the friction points used to be nobody, when they started a project around this type of concept, nobody knew how many more systems they would have to integrate into the mix.
Right.
And if you don't know how many more systems you're going to bring in, you don't know what are the data model implications that you're going to have to encounter. In fact, you don't even know the data models that you would have to encounter, right? So in that process, the previous generation technologies were sort of opposed to the entire construct that they had to solve, because the first step in those deployments was lock down a data model that will live for the next 15, 20 years. Mm. And that created a rigid structure that, you work on this project for 12 months, you roll it out, and then suddenly your business comes back to you and says, oh, by the way, we need these, and these extensions. And suddenly everybody has to scramble to figure out, okay, and now I'm going to spend the next 12 months just going through the revision because the business has evolved and changed.
It's like the Y2K problem. The year needs 4 digits, not 2. Right. Oh, we didn't think about that in the 50s or whatever.
Yeah. So that was sort of the crux of the problem, and that's where this whole concept met a lot of friction in order to get off the ground. And having learned from the benefit of the hindsight, having gone through the experience of those kinds of things and having seen where customers would start running into a wall, especially as they started to expand the number of systems that they wanted to integrate, or the amount of data that they wanted to bring, or the attribution that they wanted to expand. The first thing that we did in order to solve this problem, from the ground up in a completely different manner, was recognize the fact that we will never know how many more systems come into play. We will never know what is the data model or the cardinality of the attribution that we will have to bring in. So defining a flexible structure that was always going to be able to accommodate that information was the key part of innovation that we put into place. And then on top of that, we started to layer the ability to do what I call as the second fundamental aspect of the technology that is needed for solving this problem: entity resolution. Making sure that we can take disparate sets of data, aggregate them into a one single canonical representation, or sort of a loosely coupled structure, and then resolve that Tony from this system versus T Safoian from the second system is the same person, or Coke and Coca-Cola are the same companies. How do you do that kind of disambiguation and do it in real time, not just in batch, right? Nobody has the time for 30 days later. Now, everybody's trying to shrink their time to value to be able to find out that this is the same customer who's coming in through multiple channels within milliseconds, right? So that became the starting point for us as to how do we create the technology and the foundation that will scale to that kind of a challenge.
So on the resolution front, because that's really interesting. I mean, so much of data engineering and even some extent data science, it's around just like data cleanup, right?
Yeah.
And resolution of just different ways of representing what were really same thing, or maybe even worse, like avoiding the false positive of thinking they're the same thing when they're actually not. Is to what extent is there sort of machine learning and AI aspects involved in automating this into a real-time capability?
So we use a combination of both machine learning as well as some of the previously used rule-based approaches to solve this problem. Because the customers that we work with, the focus on the accuracy of the results that we produce from an entity resolution perspective, matching and then merging two patient records together is going to lead to a life and death type of an outcome.
Sure.
So we have to make sure that the accuracy is extremely high. And the way we go about that process is that we will run a rules-based process that takes care of any kind of probabilistic and deterministic type of matching. But on top of that, we provide a verification with machine learning-based concepts. And there is an interplay between those, because initially when you start, machine learning is validating the accuracy, versus in turn, it is also training the model to get better over a period of time, so that it can start returning the results right out of the gate as more data is brought in. So that's how we have used the combination of both of these worlds together in the foundation that we've created with Reltio.
That makes sense. So just to make it real for our listeners, what's a great customer story that you like to tell as a real example of practical applications of MDM on your platform?
Yeah, I'll start with one example. For all those of you who have pets, you're probably familiar with the Petco brand. Petco is a customer, and when they started their omni-channel journey, they tried to look at how do they bring together all of the information across all of these touch points that they have in-store, e-commerce, veterinary services. Now they're also providing insurance. How do they tie the customer information together? Because for them, these were independent lines of business. And they needed to better engage and tailor their services for their customer, not only to provide a better experience, but also to be able to do the cross-sell of these services in a more effective manner, understand who the customer is. And not just the customer, but in their case, the service is actually getting delivered to the pet that you have.
Right. And you can have multiple pets.
You can have multiple pets. So they came up with the concept of pets and their pet families and the pet owners. And they defined these concepts inside Reltio where they're, across any type of touch point, onboarding the information, but at the same time, instantaneously able to understand if we already have the information about this particular pet because this pet was brought in for grooming services versus the veterinary services, or the pet owner who's the person who's going to pay for these services. Have they engaged and interacted through the e-commerce channel or not before, and now they're walking in the store for some of these services that we provide there. And being able to arrive at that triangulation in real time, so that they can immediately recognize and tailor that experience for you based on the past history of engagement with you. And so that's one example of how one of the customers is applying it. I'll take another example. Syneos is a customer in the life sciences space. Syneos is a clinical research organization. They lead a lot of the clinical trials that happen in the life sciences space, especially when any life sciences company is trying to launch a new drug. But in order to go through the clinical trial, you have to take it through the process of figuring out which sites should we select for the clinical trial, which investigators should we recruit into the clinical trial before you even start recruiting patients into the clinical trial, right? And all of these are driven by certain sets of criteria as a part of that planning process. But in order to arrive at the right selection process and procedure, they have tons of data that has been aggregated, across multiple clinical trials that they have run with different investigators at different sites. They have new information that is constantly coming in because there is new research going on in different areas. There are different experts that are coming up in these areas that are going to be relevant from a clinical trial perspective. And that is where they came to the conclusion that for them to make data-driven decision, instead of treating each one of these clinical trials as individual things that they do, what if they were to aggregate and unify all of the data that they have about the previous clinical trials that they have run, the previous sites that they have worked with, the previous investigators, and any of the new emerging researchers are, experts in these areas, because a lot of that data sits outside their firewall. So they have to either buy that information or gather that, from all the research that is being made available, and unify this in one single foundation so that then they can drive the decisions towards the new clinical trials that they want to launch and make data-driven decisions to select new sites and new investigators that they would enroll in those processes. And that's where they're using Reltio to bring together this type of information and accelerate their ability to take drugs through the clinical trial process.
It's quite critical that it's done right, and it's very, very regulated, right? That whole process.
Highly regulated. Yeah.
Interesting. So it seems like a pretty wide spectrum of vertical industries. I can also tell by your website. of all the different logos. It's very broad, which is fantastic to see. But it feels like, and we have a certain angle on what we feel like is a massive compression of transformation happening in the midst of COVID-19 and the pandemic and everything else. The challenge to traditional business models is intense. It sounds like you're probably also very busy right now.
Yes, we are. And, the current scenario that we are all going through, one of the things that has been highlighted by it is the need for digital transformation, right? If you were already on that path, then you want to get to the outcome faster. If you were thinking that you would do it over the course of the next 3 years, then you have to bring it in, by 2.5 years and do it in the next 6 months or less.
If you want to survive as a company, you do.
It's an existential crisis for everybody.
Yes.
Right. And that is accelerating the timelines towards the digital transformation that everybody has to embrace and drive. And, just as a few examples, there are, when we talk about customers like Petco, they had to overnight deliver on the curbside services, right?
Exactly.
There wasn't any time. We have customers like Subway where they had to pivot and provide that curbside pickup for the service that they deliver, right? When you order a sandwich, you can't go into the store, but you can have it ready outside the store. So those are the types of things that people had to turn on a dime and deliver to, and in parallel also figure out the acceleration of everything that they had planned for the next 3 years and bring that in.
That's right.
And that is causing the need for them to have data available, accessible, ready for real-time consumption and collaboration across all of these engagement channels, because that's where the entire industry is headed.
My thesis is that, we're pretty sure we don't know when the new normal will happen and what it looks like. We don't know. Nobody knows. That's reason in itself to do it. I mean, we all went home mid-March thinking this is a 4 or 5 week thing, right? And then it's like, maybe it's a 3-month thing. And they're like, look at us, we're still at home. But I have a thesis that regardless of when it goes back, and meaning it's safe to go outside and restaurants, whatever, the safety protocols are lifted. I feel like some consumer behavior will have changed permanently.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. Just look at how we are working today. All right. The normal natural tendency, for all of us is to think about going back to the office. But I think the realization that work can be done in this manner is going to lead to a change in that workplace setup, right? It's not that everybody's going to, a human tendency is that you want people around you and you will want to go back to some of the old ways. But at the same time, the realization that this path is also possible is going to create a new balance in that equation. Work from home or work from any place or any location is going to become acceptable. Right. So it'll be a 50-50 type of a split as we move forward.
For sure. And look, I use my wife as an example because I'm married to someone who's not very technical, generally resists technology, which is ironic, but I kind of like that we're not in the same profession sometimes. She used to completely refuse to use grocery delivery. She thought grocery delivery was ridiculous. She loved going into the store and smelling the berries, I guess, handpicking the tomatoes. And then, it became less appealing to go, and she started using the Instacarts and other services. And now she's like, that's really great, right? So Subway may always have to now offer curbside pickup.
Yes.
But if people can go back to the store, you know what I mean? That channel is not disappearing because people like it and it's convenient. Telemedicine, and there's all these other cases that these are permanent changes in consumer behavior. So those who go through the transformation now will be set for any future scenario. And I think that's strategically important because, as you said, those that were further down the journey had a huge advantage. And whether it's MDM or other strategies that if they've already figured it out, they were truly prepared for everything or anything.
And I'm sure you're seeing this in the acceleration of the adoption of the cloud in general.
For sure. Totally correlated. Because much like, there's something special about the cloud that makes your platform more capable, more useful, more affordable, all these other things, or just pure cost savings for some customers. Like both of those roads can lead through cloud and do lead through cloud. So we're seeing similar trends. And I want to go back and revisit how I started this conversation with, which is like you and Reltio hold a special place in my heart. It was, I think, 3 years ago ish that the GCP business was actually still very nascent for us. Yeah. We've been partners with Google for 14 years, but we started with Maps and G Suite and enterprise search, etc. G Suite was, I think, very nascent for us, but also frankly, just on the cusp of becoming mainstream.
Right.
Before Thomas Kurian came on board, and it was a different world, right? And we did the first ever sort of a GCP construct deal with Reltio. First one ever. And I think it was the first partner one anywhere in the world. And it was quite remarkable. We learned a lot. And I always say this, I appreciate your patience and flexibility through our mutual learnings.
Yeah.
But there was a very particular, so I'll be forever grateful and put out there. It's just how I think. But there was a very particular reason that you wanted to adopt GCP, because you didn't start on Google Cloud. Like most digital natives born 10 years ago, 5 years, didn't start on Google Cloud. And as opposed to telling my version of the story of the why originally, I'd like to hear from you. I don't know if you have the same story, but obviously you're the authority on this. What was the reason 3 years ago adopting GCP as an option or for part of your platform needs was necessary?
Well, Tony, first of all, Sada has been a great partner for us. So, thank you for that. And, we started our journey towards GCP, as you mentioned, 3 years ago, but there were a couple of key reasons for that, not just one. The first one was having started in 2011, the first option that we started with was AWS. We were born in the cloud. We started running our services there. And as we built out our platform and capabilities, we started to see the evolution that was taking place in other areas. And the set of services that Google Cloud was starting to bring to life for the type of work that we do, which is data intense type of a footprint, managing, overall in our platform about close to 6 petabytes of information, and it keeps growing every day. So with that kind of size and scale and the need for real-time delivery of data, we have always been very interested in looking at what's going on in the space outside our capabilities and what are the new technology type of evolution that is taking place. And GCP has been at the forefront of some of those developments and bringing it to life in a more managed service type of a construct, in the sense that it's not just about raw compute where you spin up your own instances, but services like BigQuery or Bigtable, those are types of things that are making this entire evolving landscape very interesting for us. So seeing that kind of a directional shift that was starting to take place and the type of services coming up, we saw this as a great set of technical capabilities to enhance our platform with. So that was the first reason. The second reason that aided our shift in that direction was that we also at that same time were talking to Google about being a customer of the Reltio capabilities. And that created the next point of synergy where that became the path where we would take our platform into the Google Cloud. And then the last part of this was, as a software as a service provider, looking at some of the financial implications that a provider like Google Cloud brings when we are trying to figure out how best to manage our cash runway. What are the implications of how much would we have to give up front versus versus the path where we pay as we go and utilize the capabilities. Those types of things also made it attractive for us to look at the GCP direction and make a longer term commitment towards it. So those were sort of the three key reasons that drove us in the direction of making the choice of working with GCP.
Well, I'm happy to see that it continues to work well. 3 years is a long time in this ecosystem in as far as evolution. And you were, I think, ahead of your time in a lot of ways in going big on GCP. Like, I'm biased. We're very biased. We just sold our Microsoft business a year and a half ago. I feel like any digital native startup today, if the decision's being made by engineers, will choose GCP every time. It's just better, faster, standards based. They wrote, the standards. They do have magical science fiction like services like Bigtable, BigQuery, which other hyperscalers don't have. But we also see sort of commercial market pressure and shift. And tell me if I'm wrong about this, but I also believe that allowing some of your customers to deploy on GCP was also sort of a market commercial requirement in some cases, because of you were getting so you're seeing so much success in the retail vertical, and they have a bias towards certain clouds.
Yeah, and we have seen that kind of a bias from certain customers in retail and also in healthcare. Right. So those are two areas where they're starting to express their preference for a particular flavor of the cloud that they want to be on. The other aspect that we have seen growing is this notion of the mix and match, because there are certain capabilities where Google is doing more work than others, when it comes to AI, ML type of capabilities that can be available or accessible. So those are some of the reasons where, as customers are building out their top to bottom data stacks, they're thinking about the choice of best of breed type of capabilities that they want to mix and match.
Yeah.
And the fact that Google is also at the same time investing in the container technologies, that is also a compelling reason why customers are starting to look at this in a more best of breed type of capability orientation, and making some of the decisions along that.
But there was a lot of standards, Eucalyptus and all these other things. And of course, Hadoop on the data side. And then of course, VMware deserves a lot of credit for virtualization technology. And then Docker came out. But like, the world has standardized on certain things, the Kubernetes being one of them.
Yeah.
Yes, will run on other clouds, but like Google wrote the white paper and open source.
Yeah.
They're probably going to run it better. And actually in practice, they do. For all sorts of reasons. They've been running on some version of Kubernetes, for probably a decade, to call it Borg or something.
Borg. Yeah.
Miles reminds me from time to time. They had Borg a long time ago at Google. And I think, look, you still have to be multi-cloud, and that makes sense. A lot of digital natives who are able to deploy in the same way that you're able to deploy, meaning you can choose your, cloud, in some cases, choose your region. We're having a huge growth in our digital native customer base, because they're even if they start on AWS at some point, they want to diversify for technology reasons, for commercial reasons, but also offering their customers choice.
Yeah.
where they want to deploy, where they want to, house their data, that kind of stuff. So we're seeing a similar trend in the enterprise. If enterprise customers started in cloud and it felt like Azure and AWS were the only option many years ago, they're diversifying. And of course, Google's approach around Anthos, giving, sort of build once, deploy anywhere capabilities, bringing it to fruition is being attracted to enterprise too.
Yeah, those are some key technologies and the evolution that is critical for the future ahead, because it is,
yes,
whether we like it or not, it is going to be a multi-cloud type of orientation that everybody will embrace.
Absolutely. And that's good. It's good for customers. Where do you feel like the future of MDM as a discipline, or the market, or Reltio? Again, you've announced some big changes that are, positive, meaning you're seeing tons of success, and our relationship continues to grow, and relationship with Google continues to grow. But this year is so funny because it's not anything you can ever model or predict that has happened to all of us. But from this point forward, what do you see in the next, 24, 36 months?
In the next few years to come, one of the things that I'm passionate about and would like to drive forward is the democratization of access to information. And this is where, especially in the enterprise context, where most of the data has been locked away in applications, in different business functions, the ability to create the synergies and drive faster towards those outcomes is going to be heavily influenced by the ability to bring data to life, right? Really using it as the currency that we operate with. Not just in terms of how you can monetize the information that you have, but also how do you collaborate better with the information that you have, being the bigger part of the equation. And that's going to be where we are going to see some big changes as we move forward. Because not only are people making the transition into the cloud, almost every company out there has a plan to be in the cloud if they're not already in the cloud. But the next evolution is going to be around the concept of the data being available as an API, so that any business process can plug into it, use it, contribute into it, and then consume information back from it. Every experience that we drive is going to have access to that type of information. Every application is going to have access to that information. And that time is coming. That is very real and evident at this point in time, given where we are, both with the technologies and the needs that we see in the market. So that's in summary, my prediction that we are going to see more evolution on the data front as we move forward.
Yeah, we see it ourselves. I think that's very, very right. And we approach this market slightly from a different angle, but infrastructure modernization and migration is still probably the largest part of what we do. But the data work, the data engineering work, Manish, is the fastest growing part of what we do. So it's clear that comes usually next in people's cloud journey, but also it's where the real business value gets unlocked. I think is getting data in a position where it can drive decisions, it can behave in a way that's servicing line of business.
And mind you, real-time decisions.
Real time.
That's the key. Not 30 days later. It's now.
That's present today, and I think going to become more of a reality. And if you can't deliver services that way to your customers, if you don't know your customers that well in the future, you're not going to be able to compete. And I think that's just the market reality. Well, thank you so much for being my guest. I love speaking with you. Great catching up. Thank you for your continued partnership. Looking forward to many, many years ahead of working together.
Thank you, Tony. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Cloud and Clear. Check the show notes for links to this week's topics. And don't forget to connect with us on Twitter @Cloud&Clear and our website, sada.com. Be sure to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app.